Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from group 6 that consists of Aisyah Fitra, Aisyah, Chelsea Okveli, Aziza Hitari, Nurul Anissa, and Norma Hayati. Our topic is about linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. Okay. So, linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. Approximately half the world's population is bilingual and many are multilingual, as they need it for a particular reason in their regular interactions. They get a variety of languages. One language is the ethnic or tribal language, and the other was the language of education. The other served in some context, such as the market or with outsiders or foreigners, as useful language of broader communication. That was to examine the sociolinguistic standards used in a multilingual society to differentiate between different varieties of codes.
I will explain my material about vernacular languages. What is vernacular languages? It generally refers to a language which has not been standardized and which doesn't have official status. Vernaculars are usually the first language learned by people in multilingual communities, and they are often used for a relatively narrow range of informal functions. The term vernacular simply means a language which is not an official language in a particular context, used for communication in the home and or with close friends. There are three main components of vernacular language. First, a vernacular is an uncodified or unstandardized variety. Second, the way it is acquired in the home as a first variety. Third, the fact that it is used for relatively circumscribed functions. And the example of vernacular languages are Greek is a vernacular language in Australia and New Zealand, but not in Greece or Cyprus. The second example, Banjar language is a vernacular language. The last example, and is all for me grog, me jolly jolly grog. It's from Irish folk song. Because folk songs are usually written in vernacular, this one has a couple of every Irish touches. The word me is used to replace my. The word grog is also an informal Irish term of beer. So that's all for my explanation about vernacular language.
Standard languages. Standard languages or standard varieties is generally one which is written and spoken and which has undergone some degree of regularization or codification. Standard language used in a formal situation, like speech in a forum, meet the government, in a college, in school, and in a professional workplaces. Standard language can also called high language. This is the language barely used in a real-life situation. Why should we speak standard English? As we know, English originated in England during the Anglo-Saxon period was later spread out around the world. And now, English spoken as the main language in a number of countries like United Kingdom, Australia, United States, and so on. for the other countries like Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore. English of those countries has been adapting, changing, and also mixing with the other local languages. So, we have a number of dialects and accent where the pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary are very different than their original language. Next is World Englishes. In World Englishes, there has three kinds or three layers. For the first is inner language. In inner language, English as a native speaker. It is they speak the language as their first language or their mother tongue. For the example, in England, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Next is other language. In other language, English as a second language. For example, like in Malaysia, Tanzania, India, and Singapore. In Singapore, we also know the first language is Malay, and the second language is English. Next, the last is expanding language. In expanding language, English as a foreign language. For example, like in China, Japan, Russia, and also in Indonesia.
Okay, the next presentation is about lingua franca. Lingua franca is a language or dialect that is systematically used to enable communication between groups of people who do not share a native language or dialect, especially if it is not one of the native language of the speakers. For example, the most obvious modern example is English, which is the current dominant lingua franca of international diplomacy, business, science, technology, and aviation. But many other languages serve or have served at different historical periods as lingua franca in particular region, countries, or in special contexts. How to use lingua franca in sentences? This is an example. English is becoming one lingua franca which of us cause society relief. German is now spoken by up to 100 million people as their mother tongue. The English remains lingua franca. Okay, we go to the Pigeon language. Pigeon language is the language of contact used by people with different language backgrounds. This is the main factor in the absence of native speakers of Pigeon. This language is used to achieve serious purposes. Pigeon language arises when there are two groups who have different languages communicating in a situation where there is also a third dominant language. So there are three characteristics of Pigeon language. The first one is it is used in restricted domains and functions. For the example is Juba Arabic. Juba Arabic is a Pigeon language spoken in the southern Sudan that is used for trade and basic communication and borrows when necessary from native languages of the Sudan or from colloquial Arabic. The second characteristic is it has a simplified structure compared to the search languages. Pigeon language mostly only has 5 vowels that are A, I, U, E, O. And it is usually simplified the consonant clusters. For example, the word past in English become pass, or vowels are inserted to break them into two syllables. For the example is the word sleep become sleep. And then the last characteristic is it generally has low prestige and attracts negative attitudes, especially from outsiders. As in the example 9 in the book, that is, a Papua New Guinean stumbled against a white woman coming out of the theater. When questioned about what had happened, the Papua New Guinean replied, "Mi putim hanlong baksait bilong Mrs." The meaning of that is, I touched the woman's back with my hand. And then the Papua New Guinean's answer cost him half a tooth, his job, and 3 months in prison due to the confusion between the meaning of Tokpisin backside, meaning back in English, and English backside.
Next is Creole. A Creole is when a Pigeon language is adopted by a community as its native tongue and children learn it as first language. They are the characteristics of Creole. First, unlike Pidgins, which have no native speakers, Creoles have native speakers. A child born into a Pidgin-speaking community will acquire this Pidgin as a first language. As the time went by, language broadened its language units and acquired more speakers. The second is, a Creole had more regular structure, grammar, and rich in vocabulary. It could be said that the more the speakers, the more the needs of broadening the language in order to communicate better and maintain the existence of the language. Creole occurred to experience many revisions in its grammatical. It appeared to be more regular than Pidgin. The vocabulary wasn't only restricted to in trading or agriculture, but also other aspects of life, such as law, education, medicine, and etc. The third is the process whereby a Creole developed and a Pidgin acquired native speaker is called Creolization. And the last is the attitude expressed towards a Creole was different from the one towards Pidgin. It appeared less low prestige the Pidgin did. Some still thought that Creole was no less than a Pidgin even though it had broader development. For example, Tokpisin language in Papua New Guinea, they consider this language had high status and prestige, and also the language of solidarity. However, other people who didn't speak this language might find that this language funny or silly. Tokpisin is one example of a Pidgin which has developed into a Creole language. Tokpisin is a Creole because it has been learned as a first language by a large number of speakers and has developed accordingly to meet their linguistic needs. And then there are the example of Tokpisin from Creole. Big means that big, bikim means that to make large, bright means that white, brightim means that to make white, down means that low, downim means that to lower, no good means that bad, and no goodsim means that to spoil. There is another example of Creole is Bahasa Melayu was adopted as Bahasa Persatuan called Bahasa Indonesia. After being adopted as Indonesian community, it has been learned by Indonesian people as native language. At present, there are native speakers of the language.
Okay, the last is origins and endings. Let's talk about similarities of Pidgin and Creole. The similarities are, firstly, Pigeons arise in different contexts but for the same kinds of basic functions: trade, barter, and other essentially transactional and referentially oriented functions. Secondly, these functions are expressed through structural processes which seems universal to all situations of language development, processes such as simplification and reduction of redundant features, like gender markers. And it is urged that these processes will be found in any context where basic communication is the aim, so there is no need to argue for a common origin for all pigeons. It is easy to see the fascination of the debate, and it is one which seems likely to continue for some time. Okay, I think that's all from I think that's all explanation from my group, and thank you.